So chances are you've heard the word randomized used in the context of a study. So you might have heard the phrase clinical randomized trial or randomized controlled trial. So what does the word randomized mean and why do researchers use it in studies? In this video, I'll describe what randomization is and why it's used in studies. This video is the first of two videos. In this video, I'll describe what randomization is by illustrating the problem that it tries to solve. And then in a follow-up video, I'll describe how randomization fixes the problem or addresses the problem. The studies that use randomization are typically trying to answer questions like this. Was the drug effective? Which intervention is better? And it could be any intervention. For example, it could be comparing different types of physical therapy for a particular type of injury to see which one is better. You could be answering the question, did the intervention work at all, like compared to no intervention at all? To illustrate the problem that randomization is trying to solve, I want to give this analogy based on this movie that I saw a long time ago called Sliding Doors. So in this movie, this woman is having a really bad day. She ends up getting fired from work, and she comes home, or she comes to the subway a little bit early to try to catch the subway to go home, and she ends up catching it just in the nick of time, and then ends up getting home a little bit early, and as a result she catches her boyfriend cheating on her with another woman, and then this causes her to break up with her boyfriend, and then a whole sequence of things happen that you observe here in the movie. But the movie also does something interesting, and it goes back to this point, when she goes to the subway station, and it plays out another scenario where she just barely misses the sliding doors, hence the name of the movie. And as a result, she has to take the next subway train, and then she ends up getting home a little bit later, and she misses woman that her boyfriend is cheating on her with, so she never catches her boyfriend cheating on her. And then as a result, there's a whole sequence of other things that happen in her life. And one of the things that I thought made this movie pretty interesting was that you're able to see as a viewer the two different paths that her life takes as a consequence of her either catching the sliding door or just barely missing it. And you can compare her happiness with her life if she catches the train on time versus her happiness with her life if she misses the train. And this is really interesting because it allows you to compare these directly and say for a fact which one was better. You're able to look at this and say, well, was this outcome better than this outcome as a consequence of either making the train on time or not? Now, imagine if we could do that in real life. For example, let's say we could take an individual, this person here, and we could go through time and say, okay, at this point in time, let's see what happens if that person takes this medication that's supposed to help them with their heart condition. So they take this medication, then some time goes by, and we measure out here some characteristics of how their heart is doing. And then we could go back in time and say, okay, now let's do this differently. Let's now have them not take the medication. So it's not that they took the medication and then we're having them not take it, but instead we're going back and making it like they never took the medication in the first place. And so they're right back at this point, and then we observe what happens if they don't take the medication, and then out here we can measure their, the same characteristics of their heart condition. This would allow us with 100% certainty to say whether this taking the medication for the heart condition was better here versus here. And so we would get what we would refer to as a treatment effect here. So we can measure these numbers, compare them, and then say, yep, this was better here. And then if we could do that for each person, then we could go here and for this person, and they've got they may have a different severity of the heart condition or whatever, but we can do the same exercise where at this point in time we give them the medication. Time passes here, we measure the characteristics of their heart here, and then we go back in time and then have them not take the medication as if they never took the medication. Then have them go forward in time, and then at that same point in time we measure the same characteristics, and then compare those numbers and see if yes, in fact, that was better for that person. We could do this for each person. So, it might be the case that for this person, this pathway actually produced numbers that were better than this pathway. But we would know that with 100% certainty. And we could even do something like, for an entire group here, say, okay, well, this one was effective for this person, this one was effective, this one was not. So, on average, for 2/3 of the population, this helps with their heart conditions, for example. And that would be the best possible estimate of that treatment effect that you could get, because you saw exactly what would happen under the pathways. Everything else for that person was the same. It was just at this point, there was this difference. Now, this approach wouldn't have to be limited to medicine. You could look at the effectiveness of a training program for salespeople. So, for example, you could have a salesperson, and then at a certain point in time here, you have them go through this training program, and then sometime after that training program, you can measure how much they had in sales. And then you could go back in time and have it be the case that they never took that training program. And then have, go through the time here where they hadn't taken the training program. And at the same point as above here, you'd measure how much they sold. And then you could compare those two numbers. And you might find that for this person, they sold $2,000 more. And then you would know that that $2,000 more was attributable to the training, was attributed to the training program's impact. And you could do that for each person. But of course, in the real world, that's not what we have. In the real world, once a person engages in one of these routes, then we don't know what would have been had they not engaged in that. And this other alternative path is sometimes referred to as the counterfactual in research. So for this person, if they do the training program and then you come out here and you measure their sales and you get that number, well, you don't really have a different number for what that person would have sold had they not gone through the training. And we have no recourse for being able to get that number for that person, because the reality is they actually did go through the training program. And that's true of this person also. And in contrast, this person did not go through the training program here. And so you have some amount of sales that they had at this point. But this is the only pathway you observe. You don't know what would have happened with that person had you gone back to this point, had them go through the training, and then measured their dollars that they sold here. Now, you might look at this and say, well, can we just take these sales dollars here and compare them to the sales dollars for everybody who didn't go through the program? And you can't really do that. And the reason for that is because this process of how people ended up in a training program versus not is not random. Humans are not random. We don't make these decisions in a random way. So for example, I have a friend who is a very skilled salesperson, and he is the kind of person who does lots of things to try to improve his sales skills, one of which may be to attend some sort of training program. But it's quite possible that the amount of money that he would have made in sales here would have been the same regardless of if he took this program, because he's that kind of a person. He strives to make more phone calls. He is very sociable and does a lot of networking. By contrast, maybe the people who ended up not taking the training program or taking that opportunity for professional development are also the kind of people who make less phone calls, who don't strive as much to improve their sales skills. And so when you're making these comparisons, it could be that what you're really doing is you're comparing the very highly motivated people who do a lot of things to improve their sales and their sales skills, against people who have very different personalities and tendencies. And so that difference may actually reflect that versus the program. So what randomization does is it tries to break this tendency for the choice of the training or the intervention or the drug, taking the drug versus not taking the drug. It tries to break up that systematic process that tends to happen. And often we don't fully understand that systematic process of why some people end up doing a training program versus not, or why some people end up taking their prescribed drugs versus not. It tries to eliminate that non-random process by making it random. So, for example, you might take this person and then have a coin and flip it. Say, okay, well, heads, you are going to go into the sales training program, and tails, you will not. And then you go to the next person and say, okay, I'm flipping the coin again. Heads, you go into the training program, tails, you do not. And for this person, you do the same thing. And so for each person, that process of going into the treatment or the comparison group, the one that doesn't have the training program, that process is a completely random process. But you may be looking at that and going, okay, well, how does that end up solving the problem and make it easier for you to say that the differences in sales are because of the program? Well, that is the topic of the next video. So in the next video, I'll be covering how randomization that deals with that problem and gives you a great answer to the question, was the program effective or was the drug effective? I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you're interested in learning about how randomization solves the problem of trying to accurately figure out whether a drug is effective or a program is effective, or if you just want to watch more videos about how to use R for your data analysis needs, please subscribe.